understanding that power is wealth, because power in creating AI is helping increase people's work efficiency. Obviously, hello everyone, I'm Seth, this is Acquired Salary. In today's video, I'm going to talk about why big tech is investing in nuclear power. To do this, I'm going to react to CNBC's piece on it. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. I'd greatly appreciate if you drop a like on the video, because it is support like this that helps to grow Acquired Salary's reach. With that, let's jump into things.
A ChatGPT query uses about 10 times as much electricity as a Google search. That difference is the catalyst for a new era of energy consumption, one where our evolving technology demands are now reshaping how the US and the world power our future.
Nuclear energy at a turning point, seeing momentum as power demand jumps from electrification and data centers.
Nuclear power and technology, or big tech getting involved in it. Nuclear power has sort of gotten back into the conversation.
We're going to be way ahead.
I'm curious to see how Gemini integration into Google search is increasing power demands. Is it 10 times as much for just like ChatGPT, or is it less? I would think it's probably about the same in terms of 10 times. And I think, there's an AI race, and the top AI model is always changing, but I think currently Gemini is the top.
Ahead of AI, and we've got to produce tremendous amounts of electricity.
We're in the midst of a nuclear renaissance right now, and that's because power demand is meaningfully rising for the first time in a few decades. And at the moment, we just don't have enough clean energy options to meet that power demand from things like reshoring, electrification, as well as data centers.
When it comes down to it, nuclear is clean energy, and it's scalable, or it can be scaled to meet the demand. In terms of coal power plants or natural gas, when people are away from home and they're at work, there's not as much energy demand. Yet when everybody gets home at 5, 6 o'clock, energy demand increases because everybody's gotten home and they're using their appliances, they're using their electronics. And that's the benefit of fossil fuels, is we can increase our energy production to meet that demand. Or as wind and solar, there's not that same level of being able to increase the amount of energy being produced by those resources. Now, nuclear, on the other hand, is more like fossil fuels, where we can increase our energy production with nuclear based on the changing in demand, based on people's habits and when they're at work and when they're not.
This is why big tech is betting on nuclear power. Data centers around the world, built by tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and Google, are hungry, not just for AI training sets, but for energy. Artificial intelligence, driven by massive computing power, is reshaping not only how we work, but also how we think about energy consumption.
What AI did is it escalated the power demand at individual data centers by a factor of 10, or even 100 if we're looking forward into the future. That means those are data centers that are needing power along the same scale as entire cities.
The Department of Energy estimates global electricity demand could rise.
That's an insane amount of energy demand, and I think this is where we can start to make additional connections in terms of understanding that power is wealth, because power in creating AI is helping increase people's work efficiency. Obviously, some companies have talked about how they have not been able to fully implement AI into their daily workflows, or whatever the case may be. However, eventually, as AI is properly integrated into people's workflows, that increase in demand is going to increase productivity and therefore continue to build more wealth. So again, increasing people's access to energy increases their ability to become wealthy.
From a third to 3/4 by 2050, with the U.S. energy grid seeing an unprecedented strain. Data centers powering artificial intelligence and cloud computing will be among the biggest contributors to this growing demand. Energy use was already slowly ticking up, but oil and gas prices skyrocketed as energy powerhouse Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, and geopolitical volatility was on the rise.
That's really when these dialogues.
I think one of the things in the Ukraine war that they haven't talked about is the pipeline that was blown up, and I think it was blown up by Ukraine. I can't remember exactly, but this is going to have changing dynamics on the energy market, which we've obviously seen, and we can see that in inflation data.
Logs started to happen again in earnest. The idea of what is energy security, what does energy independence mean? And that's when we saw countries start to look at nuclear once again.
As OpenAI introduced ChatGPT to the masses in November 2022, the buzz and investment around large language models put the US on a path to an AI future and the energy demands that come with it.
It wasn't the tech companies' problem to understand how electricity worked. They knew that they could build a data center, plug into the grid, and there was enough power. And then their marketing people made sure that they had enough renewable energy credits to claim that they're actually using renewables to power their data center.
And so really right now, everyone is trying.
That's kind of funny. They bought renewable energy data credits or whatever to make the claim that they were using renewable energy to power things. I think it's probably, as kind of alluded to in that point, they've maybe surpassed that point now.
Trying to play catch up of how are we going to meet all of these power demand goals as well as reduce our emissions. And so that's where nuclear comes into the picture. Solar and wind are great, but they're intermittent resources. That means that it's not always sunny, it's not always windy, so they aren't 24/7. And what nuclear is it's 24/7 baseload emissions-free energy.
Baseload is what I was talking about in terms of our ability to increase the amount of energy we're putting out to meet the demands that are always changing. And then from that standpoint, yeah, if we look at footprint, obviously a nuclear power plant, it's large, but I think in comparison to the amount of energy generated, it is a smaller footprint than solar and wind from the data that I've seen.
Major tech companies are leading the charge. Just last spring, Amazon agreed to a nuclear power purchase agreement with Talon Energy in Pennsylvania and bought the adjacent data center from Talon for $650 million. Now, Amazon is investing over $500 million into a number of nuclear power projects ranging from Virginia to Washington State. Microsoft is working with Constellation Energy to reopen the 3 Mile Island nuclear facility with plans for $1.5 billion in upgrades there. Meanwhile, Bill Gates founded TerraPower is also working on a plant in Wyoming. Then there's Google, who's working with startup Kairos Power to bring advanced reactors online in the next decade, though no dollar amounts have been announced for those investments yet. Meta also says it's looking into nuclear power, targeting 1 to 4 gigawatts in new energy capacity. But these investments in...
So when you take a look at it in terms of potentially considering job opportunities, obviously everyone's always wanted to go into big tech because they provide high salaries. Well, if you can see here, there is a lot of investment going into nuclear energy, and overall energy companies are defensive stocks or defensive companies that you can invest in. So it might not be a bad idea if you're at the age where you can make a decision or kind of change your career path. If you want something that's seemingly safe, nuclear may be one of the future breadwinners in the coming years, but obviously there is some potential concerns about regulatory burden. But if we have a lot of regulatory burden in the nuclear sector, that also can create a lot of jobs in terms of having to know your regulations and how to make things compliant and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't be opposed to considering a job change into nuclear if you're at that point in your life and want to make a career change.
and partnerships are becoming an industry-wide trend, all driven by a shared belief. Nuclear is the only solution.
The tech companies have a vision of the world based on AI. That world is only possible if they produce a large amount of clean, steady power. That's why their work into nuclear now is fundamental to whether their entire world vision can come true.
These are...
I think it's kind of funny how there has been all kinds of talk about renewable energy over the past 2 decades, especially in the last decade, and all these changing rules and regulations and incentives provided by the government to increase investment in renewable energy. But as soon as AI comes to market and has such a dramatic increase in energy demands, the clear answer of the best solution is nuclear power, and all the money is getting invested into that. It's kind of pleasing to see.
Are existing and retired nuclear sites in the U.S. with space for new reactors. The next step in the sustainable transition is to design, build, and bring those new reactors online alongside the existing ones. Enter SMRs, or small modular reactors. Unlike traditional reactors, SMRs are smaller, faster to build, and more cost-effective. They produce around 300 megawatts of energy compared to the typical 1 gigawatt output of traditional plants, and they're modular designed to allow for off-site assembly, reducing construction costs and build timelines. Tech and energy companies are working to bring several of these reactors online over the next decade as incremental steps toward a broader energy transformation.
You can assemble them at a factory and then bring them to the site for the final assembly versus having to build it from scratch on the location. And so that's
Being able to assemble at a factory is extremely important because it creates that repeatability and the consistency where you can make these process improvements and just overall operational improvements, reducing the costs. If you can make something 10 times and it's repeatable and it's easy and you can just transport it, that beats out having any individual variations for something that has to be fabricated on site or something along those lines. So that's really good in terms of like being able to mass manufacture small nuclear reactors is going to have a dramatic increase in how many companies are investing in small nuclear reactors.
what's traditionally been done with commercial reactors, and that's why they've often been very expensive. And so there's a lot of hope that with these smaller modular reactors that are about 300 megawatts or even micro reactors, which can be tens of megawatts, that could kind of address some of the issues of these.
The challenge, okay, small nuclear reactors could power the future. The challenge is building the first one. The first one is always going to be the most difficult, but especially with all the regulations in nuclear, yet as we do it once and integrate learnings, we can continue to improve how fast we can build them and how efficient we are at building them and being compliant to the regulations and safety concerns, avoiding any safety concerns.
Cost overruns.
SMRs don't operate much differently than traditional reactors, but the efficiency gains they do offer will be important for intermittently scaling our energy future.
Obviously, there's a role to build still some of these plants, but small kind of scales more naturally with how demand growth goes, especially when you look at the AI side and data center space. A lot of sweet spots are in the couple hundred megawatts in terms of total usage, but those are building up in dozens of megawatt chunks per time, so they themselves are modular. So the smaller plants really can match that growth more organically.
While SMRs hold promise, they're still a few years away.
Meta 6 nuclear power developers for reactors to start in early 2030s. So again, this is one of the things that comes with nuclear power investment. It takes time to build these reactors, and so obviously it's going to be, well, this is one of the problems that we've been facing with getting nuclear power adoption is how long it takes to build, and if it's coming from someone that's a business investor or something along those lines, it's a long time to tie up your capital before you even start producing any returns. And that's where kind of the quarterly performance of publicly traded securities and can be detrimental to helping improve our long-term future. So it's great to see that these companies that have to report on a quarterly basis are making such big investments on such big long-term projects.
All plants in the U.S. are currently slated to open in 2030 and beyond. Right now, there are no SMRs operational in the U.S., and regulatory approval will remain a challenge for years to come. There are also experts who say our nuclear solution should be a combination of these new, smaller output designs in addition to building more traditional commercial reactors.
While the SMRs are cheaper up front, they also provide meaningfully less power. And so while there's so much momentum behind SMRs, there are others that say we really need new commercial scale reactors to meet our energy goals and to meet our climate goals. And right now, there are no commercial reactors under construction in the U.S.
I think
it's certainly important to have a mix of the two. You can think of the major metropolitan areas, they're always going to have a high demand for energy. So getting one of the larger commercial reactors built close by so that we can transport the energy, because every time you have to move the energy, you can lose it. So these large commercial reactors are going to have to be closer to the bigger metropolitan areas, but of course, at the same time, there are going to be trepidations about that because of the fear around nuclear. And I think this is something that's going to have to become talked about and overcome. And I think the small nuclear reactors is a great way to start this.
that for a country like the United States, the natural process is we need an enormous number of large reactors, like that's how much power we need, is that SMRs will be a way to open up the conversation. SMR gives us a term that sounds like it's new and advanced, so it makes a lot of people a lot more comfortable talking about nuclear.
Nuclear has always been very polarizing from the get-go, and then accidents like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima really kind of influenced the public discourse on nuclear and its benefits versus its drawbacks.
And the unfortunate thing is these accidents are from the past, and we have had new rules, regulations, and safety precautions implemented. If you look into the science of small nuclear reactors, they're far safer, and there are a lot of technological developments that have occurred in nuclear energy that are not widely known, and I think this is a great video to kind of re-enter discussion about nuclear power.
Mile Island Power Plant. The plant's reactor cooling system malfunctioned yesterday. It exposed about 8 workers to some degree of nuclear contamination.
Experts argue much of the opposition is based on misinformation.
Cars
Exactly.
are being checked with Geiger counters.
You're not finding anything, are you, Brian? Not a damn thing.
In today's information age, more people have access to data that highlights nuclear safety and effectiveness.
Many people think that meltdowns created the anti-nuclear movement. That's not the case. Meltdowns confirmed to the anti-nuclear movement that they were right and converted a lot of people who were previously pro-nuclear.
Essentially, he's talking about confirmation bias. If there's nuclear meltdown and people are already fearful of it, they can use that one outlier piece of evidence as to why we shouldn't do nuclear.
Or neutral. Because there was already an anti-nuclear movement based on fear of nuclear weapons and opposition to abundant energy, it was able to reinterpret and add public fear to otherwise essentially benign accidents like 3 Mile Island.
The other
I think, to his point in terms of the fear around nuclear weapons and what I talked about at the beginning of the video, access to power, access to energy is one of the biggest correlated factors in terms of becoming wealthy, and this is where we're going to have some interesting geopolitical discussions around who has access to nuclear power, because it's not terribly difficult to go from nuclear power to nuclear weapon. So it'll be interesting to see how this conversation evolves on the geopolitical stage.
main opposition to nuclear has always been around its cost. What's different this time around is tech companies have a lot of money, and they also have a very big vested interest in getting these nuclear power plants off the ground. This is incredibly long term. These reactors can be online for 60 to 80 years. And so in the long term, that nets out into a very attractive option.
I think when you look at a lot of use cases around energy growth and scale up just in history, it's often going to be dictated and driven by, where it solves the most pressing issues and the most people who are in the most pain. And I think
Yeah, essentially what he's talking about is the highest leverage opportunity. So how can we solve the most people's problems with the lowest investment solution or the fastest return on investment solution? Obviously, nuclear is not an instantaneous return on investment, but if you consider it takes 10 years to build a nuclear power plant, and then that's returning profits to the company that invested in it for 60 to 80 years, then that seems like a very good high leverage investment. It's a 8-to-1 return depending on how much you return per year.
we're seeing is there's a crunch on that on the tech side, and that helps because those companies also happen to be some of the biggest companies in the world, which then supports, I think, some more aggressive scale up and scale out.
Depending on how long a nuclear plant's been closed and how much has been already taken apart, the cost to bring back a nuclear reactor can range from maybe $100 million in the case of a recently closed plant with no updates needed to $1 billion or more if significant rework has to be done and parts need to be bought and installed.
I think in terms of cost-benefit analysis, I'm curious, how much does it cost to build a brand new nuclear reactor versus repurpose old ones? If it's $1 billion to build a brand new one, how much do we gain in terms of time by repurposing old ones for the same price? That's kind of the next part of the calculation, because anything in project management, it's based, like, quality is encompassed by project scope, project milestones and deliverables. I'm drawing a blank. So it's time, scope, and cost. Obviously, repurposing an old nuclear reactor, that's going to be a lower scope, but you're still going to have all the same regulations. But you have a baseline of things started, and then your time is probably going to be reduced. But if the cost is more, we have to be smart about how we're investing our time and money into nuclear.
Energy demand in the U.S. is rapidly rising at a rate never seen before, expected to increase as much as 20% over the next decade. Right now, nuclear makes up about 20% of our energy use in the U.S., but that share is only going to increase. While there are other factors in our increased power needs, data centers and AI are the main drivers. Market interest in AI's potential has also gone up, part of the reason for the complete shift.
Let's see that.
AI are the main drivers. Market interest in AI's potential has also.
So we've gone from 3% in 2017 to 16.6% in 2023, and there's a 60% increase from 2022 to 2023. I'm curious if I don't think we can stay on that exact growth trajectory, but it will be interesting to see. I wouldn't be surprised if we've cracked into that 20% in the year 2024 and continue to see that go up.
Also gone up, part of the reason for the complete shift in focus toward the technology and now its energy needs.
The problem is that tech companies eventually needed enough power that they exceeded the ability to get it from the grid, and because the grid was not well prepared for big tech, because big tech had been pushing in the opposite direction, the wrong direction for baseload power, they had to realize that they had to make it themselves. So big tech had to build out of the box that they themselves had put themselves into.
It feels like every single day there's a big new study saying, it's going to stress the grid, it's going to cause all of these problems. And so there are many in the industry who say that because it gets smarter with time, it won't require as much energy. And that could certainly end up being the case. But on the other hand, we have power demand growing from other things like reshoring and electrification. And so there's no doubt that power demand is going up.
But the bigger picture here is the growing potential of a nuclear-powered future. But
I think electrification is a little overblown, especially as we look into the car market right now. I can't remember which company it was, but it might have been Volkswagen, but they're just talking about they're shutting down plants, and a lot of these car companies have talked about how they're conducting layoffs over the next couple of years, if not just in this year. And it's because demand has markedly decreased. In recent years, I think we were at, 170 million cars being sold prior to the pandemic, but now they're down closer to the 140 million. And this is just data that I'm trying to recall, but from that standpoint, these car companies are starting to see a decrease in demand, which is also kind of contributing to a car market bubble collapse. But that's a different tangent on electrification. Obviously, electrification is going to be enabled more with additional nuclear power.
by driving innovation and funding critical infrastructure, companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are helping to reshape the energy landscape.
I think maybe the best way to phrase it is to borrow what I've heard Sam say, which is abundant intelligence was largely built on abundant energy. And so I think tech's ability to continue to scale and deliver better things for humanity is going to be underpinned by availability of energy.
The path to a nuclear-powered future is not without challenges, though. Building new plants and reviving old ones is a challenge met with obstacles like regulatory hurdles, supply chain complexities, and long timelines for construction.
For the first time, we're now bringing old reactors back online. Right now, there's not actually a blueprint for how we go about doing this, but I think right now the industry is trying to figure out how do we go about doing this, what are the first steps.
Yet
it's like the first time the United States went to the moon. There was no blueprint for it, but we were able to figure it out, and I think we are definitely going to be able to figure it out this time around.
Momentum is clear. With SMRs set to come online in the 2030s and existing plants being revived for the first time in decades, tech is now leading the way toward a new era of energy and sustainability.
We are finally moving in the right energy direction now that the hungriest energy users in society have found nuclear energy and plan to deploy it. It's not the profitability of their investment in nuclear per se that they're chasing. What they're hoping to do is unlock a future that looks a lot like what techno-optimists dreamed of in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, and the point he's making there is nuclear power might not be a highly profitable endeavor for these big tech companies, but if it enables them to continue to supply their highly profitable AI endeavors, then obviously that's a bottleneck that they are going to look to alleviate. So it makes sense that they're investing in nuclear, even if it's not the highest individual return on investment. If they have a higher return on investment in AI, but power is the bottleneck, they have to solve that.
When we thought we would have 1,000 nuclear plants in the US. In a way, tech, through power needs for AI, are unlocking the beautiful future we thought we were headed to before the oil shocks of the 70s.
Yeah, I think this is a great video, and it's great to see that we're starting to see our big tech companies invest in nuclear power, because that's going to make it commonplace in the near future. So I'm curious, what do you think? Please share your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. And if you've made it this far into the video, you may as well subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos just like this one. Or you can always just check back at 6 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Until next time, thank you.